Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so who's read the book this time? Liz, Cameron, awesome. You know, one of the things I love about this book is they give you the chapter takeaways. I love chapter takeaways. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started, Zach? It's 5 after. So if anybody else comes in, I'll let them in.
Let's do it.
Okay. Where do we want to start? Liz, Cameron?
I liked it. It was simple. The thing I didn't like is I felt like it just scratched the surface. Right? The whole idea is who, not how, but they didn't talk very much in the how, which, as I say it, I know it doesn't make sense, but they're just like, yeah, get the who, the how will happen. But it's like some of the questions that I have, it's like, okay, well, how do you get it? Luckily, we have the CV process, so I understand a little bit about that, but I could understand that no one else does. And then funding that whole thing, like a lot of these, it's like if you find the who, then they'll build something up to make you more money, and you won't need to realize how to do that. But I don't know, I felt like there could have been like more to it, but that was more on the how than the who. So I understand there why there wasn't.
And I agree with you, Cameron. There could be a whole nother book to this that shows you the steps along the way.
Same thought along that line. I really got hung up with the self-managed company on page 32, where they talked about that, specifically because I know we talk about like people need to own their role and have that. So that part I agreed, but then it also got into this weird area where it was like, and just let them do basically whatever they want. You shouldn't manage them. And I was thinking like, well, wait a minute, like what if your who leaves, suddenly your who is gone and you're in a mess. Like you're in a big time mess if you don't have any idea of how to do that.
And how many rainmakers know how to do anything in operations? They just go out and find another who.
I'm late. I don't know what I missed, but I'm like so excited about this book.
Just chime in, Megan. We just got started.
Oh my gosh, Phil, why is your hand up though? Because I feel like maybe you want to say something.
Oh, I raised it earlier to say I read the book and I thought it magically disappeared, but I guess it doesn't magically disappear. Hold on. There we go.
Yeah, I'm so pumped. I've been telling like everyone who will listen to me because I'm so pumped about this book. I'm like, it should go, like when you become a DOO, it should go start with why, who, not how. Like that should be, you should have to read those two books in order. Like,
ask Zach how many times he mentioned it yesterday.
Was it really 4 times? I know you did once to the whole group.
Now I went back to the old trusty, the one thing. I brought that up several times as well too.
Can we dive in with something incredible? Can I just ask, did anybody catch or did anybody count how many times the word accountability was said in this book? Nobody? It didn't stand out to anybody? It was this many times. 0. They don't even say the word accountability, which is incredible because sometimes we get stuck in this like accountability loop in our like KW culture. We use the word accountability like every 5 sentences. It's almost has no meaning anymore, right? And we went to 12-week year, who was like big quote, like you can hold a bag of groceries, but you can't hold someone accountable. And then you're like, what does that even mean? And I felt like who, not how was a really elegant answer to how you don't hold people accountable. Thoughts on that? Phil's read it. Phil has some thoughts.
I've read it. Doesn't mean I have profound thoughts. I did leave whatever chapter that was, 4 or 5, somewhere in the middle of the book. Think I'm gonna hire a whole army of people to do all the work, and then I left thinking, if I can't just hire anyone, I need to hire people who will. It's a mindset, right? It's a certain kind of person who can just take ownership, can jump in. And so I got on a rabbit hole of, well, what are they going to cost me? I can't get a person like that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I went on that.
To me, to what Megan said, it's hiring the right who, and then having a clear vision. Like if you don't have clarity of vision or you don't have the right who, autonomy doesn't work.
In fact, like those teams performed worse, like high autonomy, no clarity of vision. He mentions that research done that the teams who had high autonomy but low clarity of vision actually performed worse than the teams who had no autonomy but high clarity of vision. So that was really interesting. And, you know,
I
what
have
does
in
clarity of vision look like? Go ahead, Liz.
I have them in my notes starred too, that not only must the who own the how, they must have complete permission to do so.
Can you repeat that?
Not only must the who own the how, they must have complete permission to do so.
Which is what we see so much on Rainmakers with their first hire, right? They know they need that leverage. They want them to own it, and yet they struggle with letting go. So they're missing that permission of just do what we know you can do. And then how often does that fail?
And sometimes I think too, like to that point, Paula, like it's like there is no clarity of vision. And so they struggle to let go because they're not actually clear on what results they want or why they hired you in the first place. And so they almost can't let go because they don't even know what they want. His solution for that impact filter, man, that was elegant. I was like, that's beautiful. It's like our expectations, but on steroids. You know, it's like this complete passing of the baton of here's what I want done. I have decided you're the who. Like the book doesn't talk about much finding talent, right? It assumes you find a great who. And here you go. Like now it's your job to do it. And the third thing, so the loop Paul was talking about, the third thing is clarity. After clarity vision was feedback and like persistent feedback with your team. He never says accountability though. He just talks about feedback, like having the courage to say, you know, this is not the result I wanted. Like the impact filter agreed on these results and why it was important, and these aren't the results that we agreed on. So powerful.
I almost feel like I should take this impact filter every time I meet with my rainmaker. Just start writing things down like, oh, you want these things? Like, okay, let me ask you these few questions so we can get on the same page. Because half the time he spouts out an idea and I'm like, I love it. I'll go do it. Let's get this going. And then I'm halfway through it and he's like, this isn't what I thought. It's like, well, you didn't communicate more to me, so I'm doing the how.
And Cameron's inferential, so.
Yep. I've thought a lot about that, by the way.
When David was talking in the group yesterday, David Hancock, Cameron, I was just about ready to text you. Is he inferential or literal? It could have been you talking. It was so inferential.
Anyone other than Phil read it? Well, I know Liz read it. She's read everything.
I did as well.
Cameron read it. Okay, good. What were some of the amazing, like, what was something that stood out to you and you just thought, wow, this was an incredible framing?
Can I rewind 10 seconds? I missed that whole part of the book, apparently. I must have been reading an autopilot. Cameron, what were you talking about? And Megan, you mentioned it as well. I'm quickly scrolling, trying to find it.
Oh, the impact filter. The impact filter.
Yes.
He mentioned that I think even as early as the introduction to the book, it's how the main guy, the author, I don't know what to call him, he's like the guy who's
Go
writing.
to page 48, Phil.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's actually on 49, but
In my book, it's
Thank
on
you.
page 50.
Yeah, it's the document that explains like the purpose of your partnership.
Okay. Now I'm connecting. Thank you.
I don't have a paper book. This was when I was like, oh, I'm really crunched on time. I usually order the paper and the Audible and then I do both. And I was like, I'm not going to do that, but I still really want to get this book in. So I only have the Audible. So I can't tell you any page numbers. Just got it. Was a significant letting go for me to not have both copies.
And I feel like the book was probably better than the Audible. When you
No, the Audible has an interview between the two authors between every chapter. It was incredible.
I felt like he was just like an old man talking. When your grandpa starts talking and you're like, where's this going, grandpa? This isn't anything about the question that I just answered you. And then like the last sentence is really the answer, but it took 5 minutes. That's what I felt like I was listening to.
So
Sometimes it was really good. And I was like, I'm glad this was here. And other times I'm like, can I just skip forward? Am I going to miss anything?
So true. Yeah. Then he says,
we shared that same experience, Cameron.
I thought the same thing. But the profound parts where you were like, oh, that's really profound. Like, that was great. I'm glad I hung in for those 5 minutes of grandpa.
I have to confess, I skipped them after the first one.
The worst one was the worst one. You got to go back and listen to some of the other ones.
I really like the transformational leadership portion of it, and I thought it would have been an interesting exercise when I was leading teams to had graded myself on the execution of those or how I felt I was doing. I also think if you ask for feedback around those, you could develop some really good questions to get a sense of how well is it being received, right? So I had my own perception that I could grade of how we're doing, and then developing those questions to see how is it being received and are they in alignment. For those of you that have the book, page 88, 89 was that transformational leadership section.
For those who didn't read it, the book's broken down into three truths. I don't know what to call them, but three concepts. And that's why this matters anyway. And the first is freedom of time. The second is freedom of money. And the third, there's fourth. The third is freedom of relationship. And the fourth is freedom of purpose. And so he's talking about how you acquire those freedoms and who helps you acquire, not how helps you acquire those freedoms. So for those who did read it, Zach was inside freedom of money, talking about freedom of money. Freedom of time. If it was page 50, that would have been freedom of time, I think, because I'm looking at the chapters on my But if you think about freedom of time, money, relationship, and purpose, for those who read it, and Cameron dropped the impact filter down. That's so cool. Which of those resonated, or how did you think about those in relation to your life and your work?
Well, let me come with an example because that's how I do things. I, a few months ago, hired someone to build a deck. I feel like I am handy enough to do any of that. And I hired a person and said, I want a slide coming off of my deck. And it is awesome. I did zero work besides writing a check, and it turned out way better than I could have built it. And it has ruined me. Now, couple that with this book. I never want to do a single project on my house again. I'm like, how can I hire this away? Because they did it faster, better, and it will probably last, rather than my wife like criticizing everything. Like, this isn't right. And so now I'm like, the whole time piece really resonated with me. Like, how can I use my time wisely? And I've always thought, like, let's use my time better, or offload, leverage some of that stuff so I can use my time for higher dollar productivity hour type ideas. But that kind of brings it into the money. Like, how can I go make more money rather than just have time? And so now I'm looking at, what else can I outsource? Like, we got a cleaner, like, let's do some little things like that to just really leverage off that and make our lives better.
That he really posits that these freedoms are linear. So in other words, like, part one is the freedom of time, and his like thesis is that you have to acquire the freedom of time before you can acquire the freedom of money. And so he talks about like how most people think of that backwards, right? We think, well, when we have enough money, we'll have more time. But his point is, like, until you have time, you can't focus on the things that make you money. Like, so he talks about like people who choose not to drive anymore, and they're just driven everywhere because now they have time to actually work or like think. Or he even then goes into like just freeing up your mind and like the psychology of decision fatigue, which to me, I was like, here's where I need to take action, because I've got 3 complicated like eating habits in my household. Like, I've got some weird dietary restrictions. My husband's a vegetarian, and then my kids are kids. I was like, I feel like I spend all my time like making decisions about meal prep and grocery shopping. And I was like, okay, I've got to hire someone to like figure out how I can make like one thing, sub this in for my husband, like sub this out for my kids, you know, like do all of that, because I have to eat off a spreadsheet. Like, that's how complicated my dietary restrictions are. So I'm not even joking. Feels like, haha. No, I left my house today, or my office today, to go home and make lunch. I forgot my computer. Had to come back and get it. Like, that's how complicated it is. So I just put on Facebook. I was like, who's talent that could do this? Because I've got to hire someone, because it's so much decision fatigue just off of that. And that was his whole point, right? Like, get rid of like the room in your brain, because then you can actually think about more important stuff. It's really an interesting idea. So then he goes from, I gotta remember the linear version. Then he goes from freedom of time to freedom of money. Freedom of money, he says you need that before you can have freedom of relationship. So those are linear as well. Like, when you're freed up, when you have money, you don't have problems. Like, to Cameron's point, like, if you have enough money to solve a problem, you don't have a problem. Just pay someone to do it. And that gives you all this other freedom. The next freedom being freedom of relationship, and how to be like have a good freedom of relationship. What it means to be able to say no to clients who maybe could be worth a lot of money to you because they're not a fit for you culturally, for example. So it's really interesting how he goes linearly through the freedoms. The next one is purpose. Freedom of, or the last one is freedom of purpose. We have freedom of relationship.
The freedom of money in that section and portion reminded me, in our world, like taking it back to real estate, reminded me of what Gary Keller said in the MREA, right? Which is, we never should be as concerned with the money we're spending as the return that we're getting from spending it. And really, that sums up that whole chapter piece, is what type of return are you getting? Because each story they outline, the point was the person was able to stay in their strike zone and what they wanted to do more often, therefore producing higher results.
Can I tell you guys my favorite thing about that freedom, the freedom of money one? I'm going to, so I don't care today. So the best thing was, he mentioned this research which is quoted all the time. So it's not like the first time you've probably heard it. When he quotes it, you'll be like, oh, when I say it, you'll be like, yeah. But it was a great way to remind, or like to bring back to awareness that this is how you accomplish this freedom. And that was, he talks about the guy, whose name I can't remember, who defines work in two ways, adaptive and technical. And technical work is the work that has like a known solution, like our contract for us, that's like contract to close. Like we know how to take a contract to the closing table after execution. Like that's known, we know how to do that. And then adaptive work is the work that we don't know, we need to create solutions for. So there's not a known way to accomplish it. So taking that back to our world, like let's just stick with the TC part. Well, if you're a DOO, like, or an emerging DOO, like we want to hire out technical work. We're not technical workers anymore. That's hard for us because many of us came from being EAs where 90% of your job is to do the technical work whenever you're asked to do it. To cross the DOO bridge is to give up the technical work and to take on more of the adaptive work. So then when you look at the TC role, your question becomes something like, how would reducing my days under contract increase my profit margin? That's an adaptive question. There's no known answer, right? Like you have to go search for that. How could I reduce those days? How could operations reduce those days? What would be possible? Is it worth my time in investing in that activity? So your technical worker, your TC, will work on actually the technical pieces of moving the contract to close. But the DOO would work on answering questions like, how does shrinking my warehouse time actually make me more profit? Where warehousing time is the time that you have a house actually in your warehouse, like you've not sold it, you've not got a check for it. Just like if we were manufacturing. So like to think of, so that like it's one sentence he says, but to me that was my favorite part of that whole part of the freedom of money, because when you really realize like, and what I'm about to do, is it a how? If you say yes, it's probably that you're still engaging in the technical work that you probably have already hired people to do for you. So if you're about to engage in a technical piece, go give it to your technical worker and instead spend your time on the adaptive skill, the thing that you're probably actually promoted or hired to do, which is focus on the adaptive question that there is no known answer for. So good. That's how you get that freedom of money, because when you can get rid of the technical work for X dollars, and then he uses all these other examples, like the guy who cracks his skull open because he climbs up on his roof, but he like just made $10 million selling his company, but he's going to install like a swamp cooler on his roof. Like it's a ridiculous story to save $7,000, just sold his company for 10 million, ends up in a coma. Like, no, just go give that technical work to the AC guy, right? And you go answer an adaptive question. That's how you make money as you climb the ladder.
I think a more relatable example he gave was spending days and days making like a WordPress website, which I could totally see myself doing, right? What is my dollar per hour that I could have hired that out and I could have spent time on the adaptive, those things that only I can do, right?
Yeah. And he gets a quote and it was like $1,500. He'd spent like a month up every night, like no sleep. It was going to cost like $1,500 to solve the problem. Because it's a technical problem. We know how to build websites. Like someone in the world has that technical skill. That was to me, I was like, yes, this is the DOO conundrum. It's like how to cross from being an EA or a technical worker to an adaptive worker, and like actually giving up the technical skills to your technical hires.
The hardest part I have with that is sometimes I'm a really good who for those kind of problems, and I'm the best on the team. And so I either need to be okay with it being done differently than I would want, not to say better or worse, just different, or not as good. Or I just need to go find someone else that could do that. But like building a website, I can do that. I know how to do that. I can do it in multiple different ways. Like I could be a great who for that, but that's not where I should focus my time. And so that's what's really hard for me. It's like, I'm the best who solution, but I shouldn't be.
Let's sub out best. You're the most obvious who solution, but you're maybe not the best who solution.
I don't know. I've built some pretty good websites in my day.
But your adaptive skills are still worth more money.
Yeah, and that's what I tell myself as I outsource these things and think that like the person that I'm giving to will struggle and grow and learn a lot from this, like I did, to be able to get these skills. And so they can get better than I am. And hopefully that's the path that they'll take, and they just don't do it 50% of what I could do. And then I look at it and think, I wish I would have just done this. Unlike my deck, where I'm glad I didn't do it. It's way better. That was a good thing to do.
I was trying to find, to your point, Cameron, I was trying to find a point in the book. Early on, it talks about like 16% of problems are actually solved while you're doing that activity. I forget how they said that. And to me, it connected the money and the time thing together, where it's like you must have remove yourself a little bit to get perspective on how to make that better. And so if you're in the weeds of building that website, do you have the perspective to actually guide the project through? That's where I took it. So maybe my ability to help the website designer plus the website designer's ability will get the project further and better than if I just build it myself. That's what I'm operating on. That's what I'm saying is the answer for myself. You know, convincing myself the same thing you're saying is, no, it is better if I'm using my skills to empower that person to do their job better than just living with the task.
And that's hard for us. It's hard for me. I love technical work, right? I'm like, oh, technical work. Love it. But it's maybe not the highest and best use of your skill for the position you're in.
Depending on what position and location you're in. Like overall, I love the book, love the points. I did leave with an overarching question. I wish it would have had a chapter diving in. How do you best decide when you're the who and when you're the how? Because I do think, I was thinking with our director of operations, it's a balance based on a job description, but that job description was still a how based on what my perspective was and what I thought needed done, right? Which then allows that person to become the who. But at every point, how do you know in what areas or locations you're like, okay, I should not be the how here, I should definitely be the who. A rainmaker is a great point. They are in real estate and the teams existed because of their how. They did not have a who go out and sell homes for them until they developed a team and then to get to the next level. So how do you take that down to your personal life and decide what are those areas where you're like, okay, now it's time to switch to a who?
I think it's your dollar per hour.
In the book, he says it's the area of greatest passion and impact.
As you were talking, Zach, I was thinking like kind of the E to the P, like when you're hitting your ceiling, kind of plateauing, you probably are missing someone. You shouldn't be doing it anymore.
I mean, you tail that in with what Liz said, that would make that, for me anyway, would make sense. I could connect that to where, okay, so we're saying at some point, I'm not making an impact or I'm not passionate about what I'm doing. So I'm feeling that resistance, which means I'm probably hitting a ceiling. And then I'm looking for that who to build the system or accountability around it.
He also says, I forget how he phrases it. It's like your area of greatest usefulness. It's like if you develop if you're a web design guy who like develops a way to build websites that's like so superior, like you have like this greatest usefulness because you've like developed a system that is somehow superior, like sellable. Or in real estate, like you've got a talent that converts your database at like 40%. I don't know, like you have like some sort of like thing that is hard to duplicate. Then that too, he says, could be like where you decide to spend your efforts because it has the biggest impact. And sometimes it is technical, probably depending on where you are in your organization. He also says like every who is a who and needs a who. Like, so like you're always gonna be doing someone's what? Like you're always someone's who, and you're always have who's. So there is always at some point that you are the technical worker in some regard for some things.
I do like the way he emphasized that, like, it's not about just finding someone to support you, someone to be your who. Like, you have to be a who for them too. Like, it has to be, you're both helping each other get what you want. Like, you're not using people. Like, it's a beneficial relationship.
He even says hero. Like you have to want to be their hero. I was like, that's strong language. But I like it.
Yeah, as I was reading that, Liz, and thinking yesterday, it reminded me of like the 7 areas of life. I thought, I probably need a who that I'm looking up to in every area of life. Like, why have I not figured out who my who is for like health? I run sometimes, I eat junk food sometimes, like I have no real direction. And then I like try to get back on track. And if I had a who that was really pushing me or guiding me a little bit better, that would probably go way further.
I did that very thing this last year when I set my goals. I put the, who's ahead of me, who's ahead of me, who's with me, who am I leading? It's been very, very helpful. Sometimes the who's ahead of me is a book or it's a podcast. It's not always a person, depending on the sphere, but actually like thinking through what's the model that I want to go after really help create clarity and thought and clarity of action. At least give me a plan of where I'm going.
It's a cool idea, Phil.
So pivoting a little bit, but on the same idea of the who, I kept wrestling through the idea of the who. Are we, I think it's an and statement, but sometimes we just want to hire a person to do a task, right? Go fix this. And then sometimes we want to hire a person who, I don't know, can go solve problems or who can grow or who can take over a department. Are both the same? Do we treat them the same? I was trying to wrestle through that. Is this book saying we only want to hire the people who are able to go solve the big problems for us, or is it okay to go hire someone to do the task, like build the deck? I didn't have clarity on that, but I was kind of wrestling through that as I was thinking through the book.
Wouldn't that be what the impact filter is for? What are the results you want? Do you just want the task done, or do you want something more?
And I apparently missed the whole impact filter part of the book, so so that's a great answer.
I think the authors are like very pro both, right? Like, so if you can hire someone to do technical work, whether it's like just hey, go drop these signs off for me, I need a sign runner, or like I'm looking for my next potential CEO. I think both they would promote that you hire someone for pretty much everything that's not like your passion or your best and highest use.
Yeah, the book's definitely built on the premises that you're very clear on what your best use is and what you're passionate about. If you're not clear on what that vision is, you may struggle in the beginning parts to figuring out what part of that do you give up and give to a who.
It assumes you've read Start With Why already, and that like you've got why under control.
It's like an unwritten law. Please reference Start With Why.
What also made me think, like, in terms of the who, when you take CV, they always talk about the process is you're just meeting with people, right? Every time that I take it with someone, they're not like, you're not hiring for a specific position, you're trying to build your bench and find talent and things like that. And I'm like, who is doing this that's just interviewing random people all the time and not telling them a job? And I started to think like, oh, if I did that, like, think about the level of talent. I probably have 4 or 5 ideas of very high income earning opportunities within like our world that no one's doing. We don't have a who, and we focus on it for 2 weeks and then we all run into our normal jobs. I thought, if I were just finding people all the time, maybe I could find some of these who's that could fit some of these and take this to the next level. I mean, obviously there'd be the risk because you'd have to pay someone before you're making any money in some of these opportunities, but I need to just talk to more people, interview.
You know who's wild good at that? Like, we should get Julian to come on here, but Julian is so good at that. Like, he can lose a team member, and I was like, are we okay? Like, what do we need to do? He's like, oh, I got 3 on my bench. It's no big deal. Like, it's incredible. He has a bench that's like 3 deep for literally, he took that literal, and he's got a literal 3 deep bench for every single position on the team. It's wild. And he's interviewing people all the time. It's, yeah, it is. He's very much like the literal 3, the kind of the classic career visioning concept. We should get him to talk to us about that on our road chats.
And Cameron, when you're talking too, it makes me think about what are you not executing that if you found the right who you would, and it's not so much an employee, would it be a partner in that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I even just think of the kind of things that we do normally. Like when we hired our marketer, she's like, wait, you guys just teach classes all the time for free? I'm like, yeah, that's just like what we do in Keller Williams. She's like, I'm pretty sure people would pay for all of this content that you're doing. You just have like a 3-hour class ready to go? I was like, sure, yeah, name the topic. I'm pretty sure someone on our team has taught it within the last 6 months. And she's like, whoa, we should monetize this. And like, that's a very simple one. Like, I mean, obviously we'd have to change it from the Keller Williams stuff to try to monetize it, or maybe get certified or whatever you need to do to teach it in Keller Williams. But just coming with someone that wanted to partner and do that, like that would be a huge opportunity that we're just not doing.
So that was one of your $5 million ideas. What were the other 4? I'm ready.
I'm all about the ideas. Yesterday, one of our old employees came in. He was an old agent, and he's like, I got a business idea for you. Every time we see that's it. I got an idea for you. I'm like, yes, this is why you're my favorite. But I can't share that because it's too good. Just kidding.
I was thinking about reading this book that I thought virtual assistants could have wrote this book, because they are basically the how all throughout, right? Like you think about Fiverr, it's all based on the principle that somebody needs a who in an area they're not good at, nor is it worth their time to do. And it's cheaper if I literally can just subcontract you to do this for project B and have it done.
Phil, this is kind of like your question, but is it a bad thing if you hire a who, but you have to show them the how? You know, like more of that task doer type, like they're not going to take over and recreate the whole under contract process. You already have that how because you used to do it. Is it bad? I mean, obviously it's not bad because you're stepping out of that technical role, but should you be looking for someone that could just change that forever?
And you helped me get clear to my question. That was my point. Is it okay if they're just completing the task, or do you want someone who's going to be improving the process? And maybe the answer is yes and yes. But yeah, I had that same question. Cause I'm, virtual assistant, right? That's the world I'm living in right now, hiring one. They're going to do the task really well. They're going to take it off my plate, but they're not going to grow. They're not going to improve. They're going to look for direction for a lot of that. But maybe that's limiting what I think of that person too. Maybe you need both. Maybe you hire some for tasks and some to grow things. Yeah,
the chapter we're talking, it starts around page 30. It may even be before that, but page 32 is the quote where I referenced it. So it read, in a self-managed company, your who's manage themselves. They aren't managed by you. They have full responsibility for how they handle themselves because you made the vision abundantly clear and exciting. You've then given them full ownership over executing and achieving the vision in whatever way suits them. So maybe your vision entitles how they would do the virtual assistant job in your world, and giving them the resources to do that and then allowing them to own it.
Yeah, or think of like a TC, right? Because that's just, we all know that route, we're all familiar with that. Like, you are going to train them, right? Because this isn't like his example where he's like, hey, we should write a book. Yeah, you go do that. It's like not quite what we're talking about here. It's like you already know, you have this process, you're going to bring them and train them. But what if you hire, like, what if your impact filter said, like, the real purpose was so that you never had to touch the TC part of the job ever again? Like, what if that was the purpose? Well, if that was the purpose, you're going to be willing to train this person, but you really are looking for a talent who's going to say, this wasn't working, so I changed it. And like according to the impact filter, like the goal at the end of the day, the ideal outcome was that we had a 97% close rate with 3% fall through, and I'm beating that by 0.5%. And that I got 5-star client reviews on 80% of my files, which I did, and that my referral rate was 50%, which I've got. Like, as long as you've got the things that you had on your impact filter being met, do you really care if they changed the system you handed them? Not in this design, like not in the who, not how universe, it would be you saying, great, I don't even care how you did it, like document it so that if you got hit by a bus, we could repeat it, but good for you. It wouldn't be a micromanaging of the process. Like, no, you've got to send this email on day 3. It would be an expectation of the result. Does that make sense?
I had something interesting. It's not the book, but so our regional owner signed up for strategic coach a couple years ago. And I don't know, he met Dan or something and was 100% bought in, brought in a strategic coach to do some trainings and stuff like that. And they had us do a bunch of random different activities, kind of like this impact filter. They all looked the same, their forms, but one of them was, they called it the unique ability. And so you write down like everything you've done in the past week or month or whatever, and then give it a score. Like, is that something that's like your unique ability? Like, you do it the best and it brings you energy. You like doing it, kind of like your why. And then like, I think they call it good. I thought of it unique, good, and bad. Like, what are you good at that someone else could also do? Like, you should probably look for people that. And then what are you doing that you're just bad at? You hate that you do it. You don't do it as well as someone else. Like, how quickly can you get that off of your plate? And then the idea would be next move to that category that you're good at, things that you can do, but someone could do them better, or that you just don't like doing them, but you do them really well, and just live in that unique ability. So I've been thinking about that a lot. What am I uniquely good at that I should just live there? Do those things.
What have you come up with?
I don't know. I'm all over the map. Then this ruined me because I thought I need to stop thinking so technical. Like, I am really good at making spreadsheets. Like, I'm great at that technical and things like that. But I think like if I would like to move my income and my dollarly average per hour up, I need to raise up. You can hire a bunch of different people that are great at making spreadsheets for really cheap. Like, that can't be my thing that I do. And so I like systems. I like trying to figure out the problem, the process, automate things. All of that intrigues me. So
I think, Cameron, you should start a business where you just give people business ideas.
That is literally on my list. I would love to do that. I've thought through, how could I just get people to like put their business ideas in and people rank them and then you can partner and stuff.
You and I should talk. There's a company in my downtown area that does just that. They work with entrepreneurs and stuff that want to pitch business ideas, and you meet with them and they critique, they consult, and they make suggestions.
That sounds so awesome. It's like my dream. But then I would like to invest or be like involved.
You could Shark Tank it. If you hear one you like, you could be like, hey, let's talk after.
Come into my office.
Yeah, I think they do. This company, I think, offers like grants or money sometimes too. Like, yeah, I think they buy in. Yeah. Going back to our conversation earlier when I was thinking about like, when do I decide we need a who, we're kind of looking into this. I do think the impact filter plays a major role in that, because even what you're discussing, Cameron, probably could be sorted out in that impact filter. Because it would be looking at what you wanted to have accomplished. What difference would it make? Does it make a big difference? Does it increase your dollar per hour or give you time back? And then on the selling yourself portion of that is saying best result. So what's possible if you do take action, and worst result? So it's kind of like, hey, what happens if I keep spending hours and hours building a website this week? What happens? Or what if I do outsource it and I find someone who can do it? What's the best possible result that I could have? And you probably could sort through a lot of that thinking.
We really only talked about half the book. We've barely even scratched the surface of freedoms 3 and 4, relationship and purpose. But in relationship, he talks about always be the buyer. I don't know if you guys read that far, those who read it, but like always be the buyer, like his idea of always be able and willing to walk away from a relationship, personal and professional. Whereas like a seller is like, can't walk away, like they're trying to pitch you the idea, so they don't have the choice to walk away, but the buyer gets to accept or reject. So his point is like always be the buyer, always be in a position where you can accept or reject any relationship, business or otherwise, which was a great point. Like how many of us have teams that have fallen into the trap of you'll take any listing, like you feel like you've got to take it if they'll give it to you, and then you end up with these like terrible houses way overpriced that you can't sell, and the people are like these miserable people that no one can get along with, or team members. How many of you have gotten golden handcuffed to a agent who just sells a ton of deals for you and you feel like you can't get rid of them? You are not the buyer in that situation. Like you are handcuffed to that relationship. You don't have freedom of relationship. And it's a really powerful section on just how do you create that reality for yourself, and how can you create a goal where you're always in a position to opt out of toxic relationships. And what's the analogy? He says it's like relationships. This is harsh if you're a high S, which I am. So I heard that and I was like, God, that hurts. But he says like relationships are like clothes. If they're too baggy or they're too tight, they're uncomfortable to wear, they have no function, you should get rid of them. Like they're not serving any purpose for you. It's like that pair of pants you can't wear that's in your closet, like just throw it out. And that's that idea that you're always the buyer. Like if you have a friend group that's toxic, opt out. You don't have to go be part of that friend group. If you've got clients who are always, being mean to your TC or your LC, fire them. Like you don't need to be in business with that client. Thoughts on always be the buyer or like ditch the bad closed relationships?
It connects to Cameron's point from earlier that we need a bench. So if we fire our friends, we should probably have other friends, so we're not just lonely. We need other. Having other people around makes it a whole lot easier, or knowing who's next, or at least having options keeps you able to do that. If you only have one listing, it's awfully hard to sell or awfully hard to fire. That one listing.
Great point. Yeah. I was actually just talking to someone earlier this week before I read this section, so it's crazy, about this phenomenon. We're talking about how as you get greater clarity around what you want in your personal and professional life, a number of relationships that serve that shrinks. It becomes really small. In fact, sometimes you can't find it locally. So being super clear on like what your purpose is for being in relationships with people, or like what you want out of life or business, shrinks. And then he talks about, I forget what they call it, but it's like a $25,000 buy-in to get into this Genius X, which is basically just buying into the right group of people around you, right? That are like you, that are assimilated by this guy all into one place. That's a pretty creative way of thinking of like outsourcing or like leveraging someone to bring your community together for you. And if you're a millionaire, like there's very few people like having those conversations in the world, right? So not just a millionaire, these people are like billionaires. But wow, that's like, that stretches your mind to think about like, how do I create that community globally? What would that look like? You know, we've got Keller Williams that helps us do it.
And then add value to them. Like that Genius X, whoever came up with it, adding value to Richard Branson, like then they became friends. Like that is awesome. I love that idea. Just always add value.
Yeah, because like don't pursue a relationship unless you know what value you can give them. Otherwise, it's transactional. That was his whole point. It's really beautiful. If you're only pursuing the relationship for what value you can get, then it's just a transactional relationship. It's not transformational.
My overall journaling and thought, for those of us in the masterminds yesterday, between masterminds, this, like just really a lot of the business books that we read, particularly even after this one, it's amazing to me how much of it all just boils down to how purposeful you are with your time and what you do with it. Right? Like, I mean, I think the biggest myth I had was understanding that everyone is producing a result all the time. Right? Like, even if you're sitting and watching Netflix and that's where you're spending your time, you're producing a result. It just may not be the result that you want. So with that in mind, like all of these books, thoughts, coaching, like all of our activities is about how are you spending your time? What are you doing in those moments or not doing in those moments that are driving all of these results, right? And the who's all about that. If you're not in alignment with what you want to do, what you need to do, what's your best return on investment for the hour spent, that who comes into play, right? Who can probably do it better, bigger, get a bigger ROI on the time spent.
Yeah. Before we close it out, I will say, like, for those who haven't read it, he says, I think it's like in the intro, one of the first things he says that caught my attention is when you solve your problems by how, your results are linear and take time, right? Because you are the one who's solving the problem. When you resolve your issues or you resolve your problems with who, your results are instantaneous and non-linear. Who doesn't want instantaneous non-linear results? And like no matter what you pick, like whether it's building a deck or someone to like figure out what food I should eat based on my spreadsheet today, like someone could do that for me today, right? If I have to figure it out, it takes me time. So it's like a linear progression and it's not instant. But hiring someone else to do it makes that thing instantaneous and your success non-linear. Such a good way to visualize the power of who.
Okay, so
If I can just respond to that part, only because, you know, I kind of think that, you know, if you think that it's instant gratification, you're not almost understanding the process that it does take to, you know, develop these marketing pieces, or for example, something. So that's almost, I don't know if I agree with, you know, that thought process. You know, yes, you can at least forget about it and assume that it's being done, but you almost lose the understanding of what goes into fulfilling that result. You know, if I don't know if I'm coming across the right way, but
if you outsource it, I guess, is it okay to lose that understanding? Like, I don't know what goes into building a deck, but I'm okay with that. You know what I mean?
Right.
I just want some guy to build it for me in the backyard.
yeah.
I don't know what goes, like, what, you know, there's positions on our team that we might not need to know everything that they do to get the result. We just need to know if they can get it or not. And as we get larger and larger teams, the more real that becomes for us. We've got DOOs now and teams that have never managed a transaction. You know, they don't know what goes into it. What they need to be clear about is what results they're wanting. Not to belittle the technical work that goes into building a deck or any of it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not always something we need to know.
Right.
Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, I just think, you know, the way I was thinking it is that you're losing the understanding of the time that it takes. And so you know, you might not be, you might be expecting something instant when really it's not instant. Just because you passed it on, you know, it might still take 3 weeks or something. But because you lost the fact of the process, you know, you might have you know, an incorrect expectation. I guess that's all.
And I think the key word there is setting an expectation, right? Cameron, when the guy came to build your deck, he told you how long it was going to take, right?
And he finished on time, which was a miracle too.
Miracle.
So we need a topic for next week. What are everyone's thoughts?
Talked about building a bench.
You gotta get Julian in here. We're gonna do that one.
Hey, Megan, can you get Julian to come next week?
I'll see if he's free. Yeah.
I think that's a great one. And to Cameron's point, right? Like I've thought the same thing before. Like you just constantly interview and people have this expectation of I'm going to get hired, but I'm not really going to hire them. Like, what does that look like? Okay, so next week will be building a bench.
Love it. I'll talk to Julian tomorrow.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Okay, guys.
Thanks for the input.